Hey everyone, welcome to Board Game Informant. I'm your host Johnny, and I'm going to do an overview of 18DO Dortmund, the railway game by Marflow Games, published by Fox in the Box, and currently available on Kickstarter. So we were going to do a full playthrough, and right when we got the prototype and set up the game, COVID-19 happened, and we've had to put that on hold. We did play through a game off stream. We did record it and we may post it, where I moved all the pieces, and Eric, my co-host, and our recurring guest Dave told me how they wanted to lay their track and run their trains, and I think it went pretty well. It's not the normal quality that we try to bring, which is why I say we may post it, but I think that it highlights decently how the game is played. We made a couple of rules mistakes. And we're going to try to play it again, same way, because we still can't play in person, and hopefully we can do that soon, but maybe we'll post the other one just so you can see it while the Kickstarter's still up if we don't have time for the other one. So in the meantime, I'm just going to do a rules overview. This is actually the final game state with a couple of the components cleaned up just for so you guys can see what's going on. Before I start with the rules, I want to talk a little bit about the development, because I spoke with Wolfram a little bit about how he ended up with the railway game. Because for those that don't know, there's actually 3 variations of the game that are up on Kickstarter. I believe they're stretch goals, so they may or may not all be included in the final game. But there's the expert game, the heat, sweat, and beer, and the railway game. So the expert game was the one he initially started. So it actually began as an extension to one of his other games, 18 and Wolfram wanted to explore the brewing industry as well as the coal and steel industries, because up until the 1970s, Dortmund had the highest output of beer in the world. He thought that would be a really good theme to explore. So the initial company had railway companies, breweries, steel companies, and coal companies, all as active companies that players would operate. He described it as a monster of a game. That game was fully developed and play tested, but he felt it was just a little too complicated to be the only variant included. So the next iteration, the heat, sweat, and beer iteration, kept the railways and breweries as independently operated companies, but converted the steel companies and coal companies to a passive role in the game. And the train cards in that are actually double-sided, so those can be purchased as capital equipment for brewing companies or trains for railway companies. And that one was really well received in playtesting and has more of a Euro feel. That's the heat, sweat, and beer. The one we're talking about today, the railway game, is what I'm calling the more of a pure 18xx experience. So it's got your railway companies as the only companies that operate as active independent companies, and then your breweries are your private companies, which confer powers to the railway corporations, and then the steel and coal mines are passive locations on the map that provide bonuses. So they provide bonuses both when you build links to those locations, upgrade those locations, and when you run through them. And we'll get a little bit more into detail on how that works. So with the bit of the history lesson on the development out of the way, let's talk about the game. So as I said, the breweries are private companies. There's 5 of them in the game, and there will be 1 per player used in each game. And those will be selected through an auction. So I'll go over the powers towards the end of the video, but this is the starting package. So that's got the 5 companies on it, and it's got bid boxes next to each one, 4 of them. So on a player's turn during the initial auction, you'll take a railway company cube, randomly assign it just to mark that I'm the gray, I'm the KWE, somebody else is the RHE. And each player in turn will place their marker on one of the bid boxes. It has to be an available spot that's higher than one that's already taken for that company. So if I want to bid on number 1 for 20, I would put that there. And then second player Could do that. And third player, let's say they wanted this one here. Comes back to me. I'm not changing my bid. This player now has a choice. They could bid on one of the other open spots. They could bid me up on this one. They could bid red up on this one, or they could go to a different spot. They could say, okay, I'll go and just take this one. Once each brewery only has a maximum of 1 token next to it, the initial auction is immediately over, and the players take the one that they've won and they pay the amount that they bid. That's it for the initial auction. And like I said, I'll go over the powers that you get from those companies later in the game. So those are the breweries. And then to further integrate the beer theme into the game, we have beer cubes. And those are these blue cubes. So the beer in this game is obtained by building and upgrading what are called coal and steel links. So the K's on the map are the coal spots, and that's because the German word for coal is Cola, which is spelled with a K. And I don't know the German word for steel, but I assume it starts with an S. So that's the S spots here and the K spots here. So building track on Ks are like building dits or towns in other games. They're just worth 10. They can be upgraded to green and then brown later on in the game, and also gray. And doing this does not create the link to the coal mine. Creating the link is done with these black tokens here. So they're short tokens, which I'll turn them sideways so you can see. Short tokens that have a yellow circle with a 10 in it, and then taller tokens that have one side with a green circle and a 20 in it, and on the other side, a brown circle with a 30 in it. So in order to build a link, the track has to have been laid, and then a company that has a connection to it can do this. This is not their track lay action. And I'll go over the actual phases in a little while and the different steps in operating companies in 18DO. But creating a link is simply paying the company that does it pays 30 marks and puts that token there. And then later on in green and brown, they can upgrade it to these taller upgraded tokens. And that provides a beer cube to the company that created the link. And that location is now worth more revenue for anybody that runs through it. And those beer cubes later on will get delivered from or through Dortmund to any of these red off-board locations. And again, I'll explain the details on that a little bit later in the video. So the fact that you have to earn, there's only 18 beer cubes in the game, not including the 2 that could be in the game if the number 1 private company is purchased, and I'll get into that. But there's only 18 in the bank pool, so there's a limited number that can be gained by building these links. So early on in the game, you're trying to rush to obtain the beer cubes before they're all gone, because once the first 5 train is purchased, companies can now start delivering beer, and they're worth quite a bit of money at 40 marks a piece, in some cases 50 marks a piece. So the early half of the game, you're trying to build into these K and S locations and then upgrade those locations in order to get beer cubes. And later on in the game, you want to make sure that you have a route through Dortmund that reaches a red off-board in order to be delivering those for high income late in the game. And the handling of the beer cubes is very simple. When you obtain one, you take it out of the bank pool and you put it on the company treasury. And when you deliver it, you put it back in the bank pool. And I mentioned that when the 5 train is purchased, you can deliver, sorry about that. When the 5 train is purchased, you can start delivering beer cubes. So 5 trains have a transport capacity of 1, 6 is 2, and 8's 3. So that's the number of beer cubes that train can deliver. So after the private auction for the breweries, you enter the initial stock round. And that's done very similarly to how a lot of other 18xx's do it. So you can either buy a director's share to start a new company, which is called founding a company in this game. You can buy a share of an already founded company, or you can pass. And after the initial stock round, you can also sell shares, but you may not sell shares for companies that have not operated, including in the initial stock round. So you have 3 possible actions, and it is incremental cap. So once a company is founded, the remaining shares from the bank go onto the company treasury, and as they're purchased, the company gets funded. When 5 shares of a company are purchased, the company has floated and will now operate in the following operating rounds. When all players have passed, the stock round is over, and the person left of the last player to take an action has priority for the following stock rounds. And companies operate in terms of stock market value from highest to least. Stock price movement in a stock round is down 1 space for every 10% share sold. And if a company is sold out at the end of a stock round, it will move up. And if it hits the top, it doesn't move to the right when it's sold out. It will just stay there. The assert limit in this game is 17, 13, and 10 for 3, 4, and 5 player games. And the share limit for a single company is 60% for a 4 and 5 player game and 70% for a 3 player game. And the bank pool can only have a maximum of 50% of a company in it. And also the director share can never be sold to the bank. So somebody else has to have enough shares in a company to take over as the director. After the stock round, we'll move into the operating round. So you pay your private companies, and that will be indicated by a number in the bottom right on the share. So in this case, the face value is 60 marks, and it pays 15 marks per operating round. So pay privates, and then you can optionally layer upgrade a piece of track. You can optionally place a station marker, and then you can build or upgrade a railway link to a coal mine or steel mill. And that's what I mentioned before. Building a link is taking the black token and putting it on the K, and then upgrading it is changing that from the short one to the tall one, and then flipping it over in the brown phase. Now what you'll notice is these yellow tiles have no number in the K. If you look at the green ones, the green tiles have the K with the yellow circle and the 10 in it. So you can't actually upgrade a yellow K tile to a green K tile until you've created the coal link. And same thing goes for brown. They need to have been upgraded to the taller token on the green side in green in order for you to be able to do the brown. So it actually takes a track action and a link action in order to upgrade the K and S tiles. After that, you run your trains, and train types are just your standard 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 8. It's that number of revenue locations, DITs and towns, or DITs and cities. And a couple of unique locations in addition to the coal and steel locations. We have Dortmund in the center, which is an important location for beer delivery, and then the other gray spots here and up here are freight yards, which is actually it's Güterbahnhof, or goods station, and those count as 20 marks plus 1 per station, as long as you have a station token in there. So for example, in this tile here, the CME and the DHB each have a token in there. So when either of those run through, they're going to get 40 marks. They're going to get the base 20 plus 10 for each of the station tokens in there. However, if the RHE over here ends up running through there, they're only going to get 24. It's because they don't have a station marker in there. And if the DHB wasn't in there, the CME would get 30 for that. So they don't only get a bonus for their own station, but also for every other station. And the reason for this is that these are goods stations where goods are interchanged instead of passengers. So it makes sense that the more companies that are present there, the more goods are getting exchanged and the more valuable that location is, or the more profitable that location is. The red offboard locations change value after you hit the brown phase. So in yellow and green, they're worth the lower value. And in brown and gray, they're worth the higher value. Stock price movement in the OR is, if you withhold, you move to the left. If you're all the way on the left, you move down. If you pay greater than 0 and less than the current stock price, the stock market does not move. If you pay greater than or equal to the current stock price but less than 3 times the stock price, you move to the right once, or up if you've hit the right, if you've hit one of these green arrows. And if you've paid greater than or equal to 3 times the current stock price, you move twice to the right. After you run your trains and pay or withhold, you have to purchase trains if you don't have a train. So you may purchase trains, and if you don't have one, you must purchase a train. That can either be from the bank or from another company, starting at the very beginning of the game. So a lot of games, the cross-company train purchases can only happen after the green phase. In this game, it starts all the way in the yellow phase, and that can happen from anywhere from $1 to whatever price is agreed upon. No maximum. And the other action that company can take, and this is at any time during their operating round, is they may issue 1 share to the bank, which will drop the stock price by 1 value for the 10% share sold, or they can redeem a share if there's one in the bank. And that both of those happen at current market value. So routes are pretty standard here. They must include a station token of the operating company. They may start or end their route in a tokened out hex, but may not run through one. So, for example, that location is tokened out. The BME could start or end their route there, but it could not run through that location. You cannot skip hexes with income values. You cannot run through red offboard areas. You cannot use the same track twice. And you cannot count the same revenue location twice. So even if I can circle around and hit the same one twice without reusing track, I still can't do that. However, multiple trains in the same company may hit the same location as long as they don't reuse any of the same track. So those are all pretty standard route rules. Track placement, we've got yellow track in the 2s, green track comes available in 3 and 4, and 5 and 6 open up brown tiles, and the 8 is the gray, opens up the gray tiles. And yeah, those are all pretty standard. The train ranks become available as the previous rank is all sold out. So once all the 2s are gone, you can start buying 3s, with the exception of the 8s. There are 3 6 trains, and when the first 2 are purchased, the 8s become available. So what I do is I put it underneath the second 6, so that way once the second 6 is bought, you can see that there is a 6 and an 8 both available for purchase at the same time. The other, I think I've mentioned this already, but just to reiterate, the other rule for laying track is that the K and the S tiles can only be upgraded by K and S tiles, and only if the links are at the correct level. So greens can only be placed if you've linked in with the 10 value K token. And then once you have a green, that can only be upgraded once that K token is upgraded with the green upgrade. And you can see that on the tiles themselves. This brown tile has a K with a green 20, indicating that that must be present on the tile from which it's being upgraded. Let's see. So there are no bankruptcies in this game. If you must buy a train, the company must use their entire treasury first. Then they must sell shares owned by the corporation. And again, the stock price does move down 1 for every 10% share sold. They may, in this case, break the 50% bank pool limit that I mentioned earlier. After they've sold all the shares they can sell, the director must spend their private cash. If there's still not enough money, the director must sell shares of the active company, also ignoring the 50% bank limit. And then if they're still short, you simply write down the amount that they're short, and you double that and subtract it from the final score of that player. Rusting of trains it's a hard rust for the 2s and 3s, so the 2s rust when the first 4 is purchased, the 3s rust when the first 6 is purchased, and the 4s soft rust when the first 8 is purchased. So they get one final run after the first 8 is purchased, and to indicate that you just tap it or turn it at 90 degrees, and then once you've run it that final time, you discard it. So the 5, 6s, and 8s are permanent, and once the first 5 is purchased, you can transport beer, 1 with a 5, 2 with a 6, and 3 with an 8. And I'll get to it in a little bit about one of the private companies, but one of the private companies adds a transport capacity to a single train, and that can be used on a 3 and 4 to give them 1 transport capacity. 2s can never transport beer because those are rusted by the time the first 5 is purchased. So let's talk about exporting beer cubes. So to export a beer cube, you have to have a valid route. It has to hit both Dortmund and a red offboard. If Dortmund is stationed out and the only valid route that you have has to go through Dortmund, through tokened.out Dortmund, which is normally not allowed, you may do it in this case, but you don't get to count Dortmund for your income. Although it does count against your train length. So that's the exception to tokened out spots. When you actually get that valid route and you're able to deliver cubes to an offboard, they're worth each beer cube is worth 40 mark, except if you deliver to your home station, it's worth 50 each. So there's a few companies, the BME, the CME up there, and who else has one? I can't find the other ones, but there's a few companies, maybe it's just those two, that have their home stations on red offboards. And those companies, if they deliver to their own home station, get 50 marks per beer cube instead of 40. So let's talk about the 7 companies. There are 7 companies in the game. 4 are available in the first stock round. So the BME, the RHE, the CME, and the KWE are the first 4 companies that you can start. The 5th company, the DGE, becomes available after the KWE is founded. And that's founded, not floated. So as soon as the director share of the KWE is purchased, the DGEE can be started. And then after the DGE director share is purchased, the DHB can be started. And then the last company becomes available after the DGE has floated. So once 50% of the DGEE has been purchased, the final company, the HHW, can be started. And one thing to note is the director shares aren't all 20%. There are some 30%. And there's also some companies in which the second share is also a 20%. So you can see the DGE, the first and second shares are both 20% shares. And there is it actually tells you the order to stack the shares so you don't get confused about where that's supposed to be. Some of the companies have special powers, the starting 4 companies to be more specific. The CME and the RHE can buy a train at the beginning of their first operating round. And the BME and the KWE start the game with one of these K tokens, the coal tokens, and they can place those for free instead of paying 30 marks for it. So let's talk finally about the breweries and what their powers are. So unlike other games where the corporations purchase the private companies from a player in order to get the power, in this game the player hangs on to it till the end of the game, or until they go away with the purchase of the first 6 train. And instead, the player gets this square marker. I don't know what it's going to look like in the final game, but in this prototype, it's a square marker. And that can be assigned by the player that owns it to any company. And that gives that company the power. That has to be done before the first 6 is purchased, otherwise the ability to transfer that power goes away and the player does not get compensated. So in this game, there's no stripping money out of a company by selling a private into it. So the 5 powers that can be conferred to companies, number 1, the Stiftsbrauerei. The purchasing player gets 2 beer cubes, and those are not from the bank pool. So this, in a game where that brewery is purchased, there will be 20 in the game, and that player can transfer those 2 beer cubes to any company at any time before the first 6 is purchased. The second one, the Dortmunder Action Brauerei, reserves a station in Dortmund. So it still has to pay for it, but it's reserved up until the first. It's actually reserved until the first 8 is purchased. But the power needs to be given to the company by the time the first 6 is purchased. Number 3, the Ritter Brewery. That allows the assigned company to station in Dortmund for half price. So it doesn't reserve a spot, but if it does place a station there, it does it at half price. And the Kronen Brewery gets an additional 10 marks for each route with a beer transport in it. And that power stays with the company through the end of the game. So it's not plus 10 for each cube, but it's plus 10 for each route that delivers at least 1 cube. And then the final one, the Dortmunder Union Brewery, increases the beer transport capacity of any one train by 1. And that can be used, as I said, on a 3 and 4 train to allow those to actually deliver beer cubes. And that's it. So that was mostly comprehensive. I may have missed something, and I'm sure that we'll get comments on rules that I missed or got wrong. But I think that should give you a very good idea of how the game plays. We've managed to play it once, as I said, via non-conventional online with me moving everything around. It wasn't ideal, but we're going to try to get that posted up on the Kickstarter because I do think that it still gives you, we got a few rules wrong, but I think it gives you a good feel for what the game is like. We really enjoyed it. I thought it was really interesting, and I'm really excited to play the Heat, Sweat, and Beer and the Expert games, as those just add even more to the game. But if this was the only thing included, I'd still say that it's worth it. We had a lot of fun with it. It's very different, just the whole concept of trying to collect the beer cubes and then still have those companies have good routes to actually deliver those later on in the game was a really fun mechanism, and I enjoyed it quite a bit. So hopefully this was enough to help you decide whether or not this is a game for you. And if it is, it's on Kickstarter right now. Today is the 28th. It just launched today, so it'll be up on Kickstarter until the end of June. I don't have the exact date, but I'll put it in the description along with a link to the Kickstarter if somehow you found this video not through the Kickstarter. So anyways, I hope that you enjoyed the video, and I hope that you go and back 18DO Dortmund.